Hello, story seekers. I'm Nico.
I'm Ben, and you're listening to The Tiny Bookcase.
Our guest for this episode is the author of the Articles of Faith series and the new Tales of the Plains trilogy.
He lives in Hertfordshire with his family and an increasing number of animals, and his latest book, The Hunters, is out this July. We would like to warmly welcome Dave Wragg.
Hello, Dave.
Hello.
An increasing number of animals is an interesting phrase because it makes it sound like you come home and there's just more there.
Or that they're breeding.
If my kids had their way, they certainly would. We do have an increasingly large dog, which I mean, it's a Labrador, so she just sort of swells with every biscuit. But no, mostly it's your standard sort of cats, dogs, and again a desperate hope for a large number of rodents, all of which the cat would murder.
Well, yeah, such is life.
Such is life.
Up to a point, yeah.
I've got a question for you to open us up. I noticed from your website that you have had made some maps for your series.
Oh, the secret maps.
Yeah. What do you think makes a good map for a fantasy book series?
I think you're asking the wrong person if you've looked at the maps. Well, funnily enough, I've just started reading Talon Sister by Jen Williams. I've been lucky enough to get an arc of that, and that, which is impressive for an arc, has a map on the inside of it, and it's a really good one. It has a whimsical style, you might say. The art style is compelling in its own right, but it also shows you where everything is and where they are in relation to each other, which I know sounds a little bit mundane for a map, but I have looked at some fantasy maps in the past, and they are so stylistically beautiful as to be functionally useless. I mean, and that's fine, but you might as well just include some really cool artwork then and not even bother calling it a map.
Absolutely. I mean, I know some authors just refuse to use maps at all. I mean, I know, was it Joe Abercrombie that hadn't produced a map for any of his books until his YA stuff came out?
I can believe that. I think he's sort of lent into maps subsequently. Now, I have had maps. So those maps only went up on my website really in the last month or two. But I was essentially bullied into it by a fantasy reviewer who said, I don't know where anything is. Do you have any maps? And I'd made the maps for my own secret purposes just so I knew where things were. But they were essentially, post-it notes in digital form. So I tarted them up a bit before uploading it, but that was it. But I was told fairly early on when I was in the pre-production stage of my first book, The Black Hawks, I was sort of in that, starry-eyed, oh, I've got a book deal, oh, I'm going to be published. I'm doing fantasy. Will there be maps? And my editor at the time told me very firmly, no, there will be no maps. Yours is a kind of non-map fantasy.
Did they expand on that, or
not really? Just from her tone, it was kind of implied that A, I should know that, and B, asking the question had once again revealed quite how thick I was. So we never really went any further with that. But I have been reassured since that I'm a sort of mapless fantasy. It's not really that kind of thing.
I don't think anyone stays safe from it, though. Even Pratchett at the beginning refused to map Discworld.
Oh, yeah.
Said it was impossible to map a sense of humour. And then, some years later, we got a Discworld Atlas. So,
yes. It's funny how, the lure of the tie-in dollar can become quite compelling. But I would never hold that against Mr. Pratchett, because after all, he had people to do it for him.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The best kind.
Yeah. Well, time for some stories, methinks. So our regular listeners will know how it goes, but for those of you joining us for the first time, there'll be 3 stories told in this episode. This week, the prompt has actually been drawn from a short story that Dave originally wrote in 2018, and that prompt is bitching. Nico, you're up first.
Right you are. Bitching. Everyone in town knew Mr. Jacobs. No, that isn't right, is it? Everyone in town knew about Mr. Jacobs. He lived in a house that you could call, or at least all the kids in the neighbourhood would call, haunted. It was too tall and dark, like it had been pulled from the pages of a storybook. If he'd been an old woman, we would have said she was a witch. But he wasn't. He was Mr. Jacobs. And you never saw him. not properly. You might see the curtains twitching if you played too close to his looming residence, but we never saw his face. We would imagine it was grotesque, covered in weeping boils, or split at the mouth so his smile spread all the way around his head. We'd go into the woods behind his house and play Here Comes Mr. Jacobs. One of us, normally a boy, would be Mr. Jacobs, and the others would run and hide so he didn't catch you and feed you to his dog. We'd all seen the dog. It was huge. It was like a horse with droopy ears and gnarled paws. It had to be as old as him, we reckoned. His name, the dog, was Apollo. I asked my dad why, and he didn't know. We would all see Apollo patrolling the back fence behind Mr. Jacobs' house. When we played in the woods, he'd press his wide snout between the bars of the gate, and let great strands of drool ooze onto the dark metal. No one had ever gone to pet him, even when he looked sad, in that soft-eyed way that dogs do. We'd be too close to the house, we all said. My mum told me once that Mr. Jacobs and Apollo were birders. They would go into the woods and catch animals, mostly grouse and the like, to sell to the butcher. So we should be grateful to him because he was doing us all a service. And we shouldn't call him Lumpface. She told me our game was cruel. After all, he was simple. Well, we all grew up and soon found that Mr. Jacobs' house wasn't very scary anymore. Suddenly we weren't chasing girls as a deformed mockery of an old man. Instead, we were trying to snog them. And a lot more. I'd had a successful night of snogging, a lovely girl by the name of Jamie, when I decided I would find somewhere to have a joint. Not too far from home. I wanted to be able to make it back, and it was my first one, so I didn't know how potent it would be. Jamie didn't want to try any, and had called me a dickhead, so I went on my own. I barely noticed Mr. Jacobs' house as I trudged into the woods. The pre-rolled joint that I'd bought for what seemed an extortionate price from the sixth form I clutched delicately in one hand, and my lighter in the other. I didn't really think about how overgrown his walls might be now, so when I found a solid thing to lean my back against, not too far into the woods, it seemed to me to be an absolute win. As I lit the thing and inhaled my first lungful of smoke, I didn't know who the sudden explosive coughing it elicited from me would be waking up. I smoked the whole thing, because it was bloody expensive, and decided to just let what night sky I could see entertain me. I'd seen people smoking weed in movies, so I waited for a variety of presupposed things to happen. And I felt myself melt into the greenery, like I'd become a flower. My body felt so relaxed. When a shadow loomed over me, I couldn't help but laugh. Everything seemed so funny to me in that moment. The figure held in its hand several birds, their feet and heads dangling sadly around his muscular grip. Oh shit, Lumpface! You caught me! I fell into a fit of hysterics and tried to spew more words. The muscles in my mouth couldn't seem to keep time with my brain. My brain was telling me something else too, but paranoia was part of it, right? But that did look like a big gun in his other hand. The butt end of the gun got very big, very quickly, and then nothing. I woke up with a dry mouth, but I didn't really notice. What I noticed first was the excruciating pain at multiple points in my body. I had so many warring agonies, I didn't feel like I could pinpoint any of them. I twisted my head down to look at myself, to see that my body was naked. My lower half was covered by a blanket. It was a blanket, wasn't it? It was like I couldn't quite feel right. Easy now, a voice told me. Mr. Jacobs? He fucking hit me, didn't he? My dad had sought him out, no doubt about that. I opened my mouth to tell him so and found myself unable to make the words. He drugged me. Well, I drugged me first, I thought, in some manic desperation for humour. I tried again to call out and felt my throat constrict horribly, like a rubber glove held at both ends and pulled to the extreme. I say easy now. You'll ruin your stitches. I panicked at his words. Stitches? What the old freak done to me? I reached for my throat and found the sensation to be wrong. There was pain where I probed with my hands, and I tried to close them around my throat and felt nothing, or more accurately, the absence of something. It was near impossible to describe. I raised a hand to eye level and felt a rush of boiling vomit surge up inside of me. The digits were gone. Instead, soft nubs remained where they'd been. The whole thing was tightly stitched into a formation that seemed altogether wicked and unnatural. I thrashed a moment and tried to kick the blanket away from my legs in order to stand and run. My kicks felt so wrong, like the motion was brand new to my body. I tried to call out again and felt only a yelp escape my throat. I say easy now, or I shall have to give you another strike. The figure of Mr. Jacobs was over me and seemed so huge in the space. I wanted to ask, what have you done to me? But as I regained more sense, I knew I couldn't talk, could I? He'd done something to my voice, or my mouth, or something. Right, there you are. If you behave, I shall fetch a mirror and let you see yourself. Can you behave? I looked up, dumbstruck. He seemed to take it as the affirmative and dragged a huge cloth-covered shape into the heart of the room. It unsettled dust, and the thick scent of mildew suddenly seemed to fill every pore. With no flourish, he whipped the sheet off the reflective rectangle, and I saw hell. I was no longer a teenage boy. I looked at a sea of bare pink skin, carved here and there, stitched up with coarse black thread. I had been reconfigured. The lizard part at the back of my brain said, dog. And it was right. My knees were the wrong way. My nose had been broken and shifted into some strange snout. Flaps of skin had been sliced away to give me dangling ears. I tried to swear with every fibre in my body, and all that came was that same harsh bark. It was a bark. He'd taken away whatever made my speech right. I tried to stand and assault him, and felt white-hot pain in my twisted and reset joints. I tried to ask why, using only my eyes, and he simply patted me and said, "Good girl. There's a good girl." I wanted to bite him then, to take those rotten old fingers off, but he stood and crossed to the door, opening it. In trotted the lumbering form of Apollo, the great slathering mouth, the gigantic frame. Slowly he began to sniff his way towards me. "Apollo's got needs," Mr. Jacobs said, matter-of-factly. "I can't afford having no puppies round here. Barely get by me and Apollo." He spoke as if to God, his eyes looking at the filthy ceiling. I whimpered, as it was all I could do, as the sounds of the snuffling exploration disappeared from my eyeline. "Both got needs, me and Apollo," he said again, justifying it to himself. "And you children are unkind, waking me up, mocking me, not nice at all." He looked straight at me then, and I saw his simpleton eyes watering. I prayed in that moment for death. Then I felt those long strands of drool that I remembered coating the gate begin to drip further and further up my back. I tried to scream as I felt saliva on my neck. "Apollo's got needs," he said. "Apollo's got needs."
Hot fucking damn. Oh, ah.
That's one of the most horrifying things that I think I've ever experienced.
How terrifying are you in the bedroom?
Well, Apollo's got needs.
Apollo's got needs. Is that what you sort of mutter every
Oh
time?
my god! Have you got that on a T-shirt?
If not, he's got it on a tattoo on his back here.
Jesus.
Oh, that was intense, man.
Oh,
Holy shit.
yeah. I don't even know how to give feedback on that because I'm essentially clenched from head to foot.
It's probably best not to, or you'll end up on a list.
I'll give it a go. I loved the coarse black thread of the stitching.
Oh
That's
god. Yeah.
such a of all the things that's happening to him in that moment. Somehow that little bit of description, because it was quite mundane and probably a testament to how carelessly the work was done.
Yeah.
It was really horrible. It was just horrible. It kind of grounded it. I think there's a kind of like emotional distance that people can put between themselves and a horrible story like that. You know, like as in the horror of the story.
Oh yeah.
And putting little bits of mundane description like that in drag people back into the reality of the story world. And that worked very, very well. You deployed it at exactly the right time, I thought.
Oh, I'm glad.
But also, I'd say the use of the word pink. I mean, it's such a short, but it's such an emotive color, and that the coarse black and pink skin just. Oh. God,
Yeah.
it's all too easy to picture, and I do not want to picture it. Thank you, Nico. And then the recurring image of the drool as well.
Yeah.
I mean, because that was brilliantly described at the beginning, visceral and clear, and to see that as the returning motif at the end, Jesus God, man.
That's his official job description.
Jesus God, man. Italian law.
Yeah.
So I will actually say that it reminded me very, very much of your story from, I think, episode 6, which was a long time ago now, where it was for the Wonderland prompt, where your story was about the guy that was turning people into chimps, but it was from the point of view of the dude who was doing it rather than someone having it done to them. And very, very different story, even though like this idea of turning people into things is the recurring one there. And then obviously it's also got some Kevin Smith's Tusk in there as well, I think.
Oh, definitely, there's some Tusk in there. I'm fascinated by that as a narrative concept, though, the sort of reconfiguration of people into other things. I think it's horrifying in all of the right ways, because we know those shapes, and it makes your brain. So where does you don't have to say, and his back was like this, and he's like this, because I say dog, and you go, oh, I know what shape a dog is, and what shape a man is, and how do you? Oh, and you have to fit it yourself. It's awful.
IKEA dog. In terms of effective horror, it was wildly successful. I would say possibly excessively successful. And the only minor point I'd raise from sort of the back of the room is that it didn't feel like the protagonist had sinned that badly to deserve his fate. And I know it's only a quick tale, but I have that instinctive, like, you know, a lot of the time in horror films, either it's something that someone did a long time ago coming back to haunt them, or it's the sort of that collective responsibility for something in a community where, you know, you all did racism and now you're going to pay, kind of thing.
Oh, he was a racist. I didn't put that in. But
well, there you go. Yeah.
I mean, the word count.
Actually, he was smoking a joint, and drugs are bad, kids.
Yes.
So.
He did the weed.
Yeah.
This is straight out of the Nixon administration. This story.
Jamie had his number. She called him a dickhead. I mean, the writing was on the wall.
She should have called him a dirty dog.
Slightly on the nose.
I think that's a really good bit of feedback, because I think you could potentially just add in a little bit about how they like threw rocks and broke his windows or something.
Yeah.
And just a few more little bits like that, and then have him forget because he was a kid, and he sort of you know, it's very easy to start dismissing things that you did as a kid and be like, oh, I was a dickhead back then or whatever.
Whereas now,
now, yeah.
Now it's also the like time compression for children. You know, the thing you did 5 years ago to a child is a lifetime ago. You're completely different. Whereas to an adult, I mean, I can't remember 5 years ago any more than I can remember a week ago. It's all just a stupid middle-aged blur.
It's just we've all fallen off a cliff, and now we're just hurtling towards the end.
The sweet release of death awaits.
Yeah, it waits. Yeah.
Yeah, I make you guys right. I think so that a bit of intensification of what they, at the beginning, obviously they're all mocking him and pretending to be him as a monster in the back garden. But yeah, I think if that should have peaked slightly higher.
Yeah, I mean,
so.
the time they had sex with his dog is probably going to be quite high up there, I think, in terms of come-uppance. That is the term for that.
They've got needs. From right at the start, the smile that goes all the way around his head. That was a good bit of description, I thought.
Oh,
I
yeah.
liked that. Overall, I thought that was a really strong tale. And one of my favorite things about doing this podcast is seeing the emerging commonalities in the way that your creativity goes, and me exploring it for me as well.
Yeah.
And so for this to be a thing that, because actually quite a lot of stories do involve some manner of torture in some way.
Yeah.
So I think it's clear, and you're starting to, well, you already are very good at it, but you can now just deploy that really easily, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I'm looking for a government job.
Yeah, I was going to say, at what point is this either an intervention or a job application?
But thank you. I do really
Is that the
appreciate
Home Office? Got just the guy.
It's going to be Rishi's boy.
Yeah, sorry. Bit political.
Rishi's boy.
Right, so the next tale is going to be from you, Dave, and this is something that you wrote in 2018. And
It's a 2018. It was a highly experimental piece that I wrote. I mean, without wishing to go off on too much of a tangent, I wrote my original 2 fantasy books sort of back to back, 2015 to 2016, and then spent ages polishing them up, querying, submitting, etc. So by the time we were going through the edits of the first book, I had more or less written the second one and wanted to try something else. And I said to my agent, I've got this idea. I think it'll be pretty cool. And he went, shut up, not now. So I went away and I wrote this, and then I went back to the agent and I said, hey, what about this? Do you think I could do this for books? And he went, shut up, not now. So yeah, I went away and wrote an entire book based on this character, and then went back to the agent, and he said, shh.
It sounds like you have a really functional but dysfunctional relationship with your editor, which is wonderful.
He knows what he's doing, and I don't, so he has to continually try and sort of put me back on the rails. But I'm continually attempting to veer off, basically because this is not a fantasy story, and I was saying, I want to do this kind of thing, and he was saying, no, you're a fantasy guy now. You've got to do 2 fantasy series before you're allowed to switch genre in any way. So here we are now, 5 years later, as the first book of my second fantasy series is finally arriving. So just in another 2 short years, I should be able to go back to this.
You'll be allowed off the leash
if it goes well. And you be the judge. It may in fact not.
Fantastic. Well, when you're ready, let's give it a listen.
The Bitching Hour. The stink rising from the toilet bowl tells me I've had too much coffee. But sleep's out, and if I hit the stims now, I'll have nothing left when the call comes. If the call comes. A splash of cold water, and another slammer of nasty hotel powder coffee it'll have to be. At least the room's flash. Clean lines and realistic marble effect. Aggressive aircon, quality air guaranteed in the terms. Outside the black slab of window it's raining, hot and acrid, but the room is a hermetic refuge. Just me, the smell of my coffee piss already blasting out of the hidden venting in the bathroom pod, and the case on the bed. Ugly fucker it is. Looks more like a tombstone than ever. Another look at the hotel phone, nestled in the corner of the desk space, a self-conscious anachronism. 3 rings, no more, no less, will be the signal. 5 is right out. Time check. Far past late, not yet early. The bitching hour, when thoughts wander in stillness and solitude. There's whiskey in the minibar, that ghastly blended shit that only desperate tourists would junk their credit on. So other stuff doesn't exist outside minibar fridge units in outwardly upmarket joints across the globe. Maybe there's a wholesale conspiracy, shipping this swill, salvage from distillery drains, greasing palms in hospitality circuits, sneaking crates of little piss bottles into fridge cubes via hidden compartments in the housekeeping trolleys. I stare at the neat little bottles a little too long, then shut the fridge with a puff of sealant. I hadn't realised I'd open it. Once I know the job's off, maybe I'll come back to those little bottles. Not like the rooms in my name or my cred. Although if it's really off, I might need to take them to go. Make more coffee, pulling the tab on the heater pad and watching the bubbles rise. Smells the same on the way in as it does on the way out. The phone is silent. A single red dot, its only sign of life in the room's blue gloom. Years ago, I'd wondered why hotels still put phones in their rooms, given the cascade of alternatives for guests to communicate their every need. Now I know better. They won't call my presence. They can't, and I can't call them. The room is the job. The phone in the corner is the job. The case on the bed is the job. I've not opened it. Not until I know the job's on. But I know what's inside. Phone silent. Its red light a sad, steady glow. Coffee still rank, worse as it cools. I sit on the bed's edge, close to the case, the imitation cotton sheets rucking authentically at my arrival. Fight the temptation to put a hand on it, to run my fingers along the fastenings, relive some memories. Some shitty memories. It is the bitching hour after all. Deep sigh, tasting clinging coffee residue. There's an odd feeling about this job. A dullness. I become numb to my own feelings about it. An older part of me remembers swearing off this kind of work, laughing at the idea. The older self remembers the younger. Things have changed. But that's what they do, isn't it? Things. Fuckers. A sound, a heart-stopping sound. I'm off the bed, halfway to the desk, but the phone remains inert. Corridor noise. Other guests, one taking a call as he passes, his voice a mumble through the wood effect door plating. I can feel the thump of my heartbeat. No need to check telemetry. Sink back to the bed as silence returns, enveloping, enclosing. I feel a tingle now, something that doesn't show up on the internal monitoring. Is that relief? The old me is chuckling, wizened and cracked, would probably be wheezing if I'd let her keep smoking. I picture my old Thea, my mother's aunt, in the last of the visits I made to the old country, sitting in her ancient chair on the bleached veranda, her eyes screwed up against the evening sun, wreathed in cheroot smoke and cackling. Afraid, says my old self in her voice. Get to fuck, I say out loud. Afraid. Shit. There are few fears left, in the realm of the physical at least. Once you've been treated to the closest thing to death the body can get before there's no coming back, you can have a hard time regaining what might be called a level outlook. The plates in my abdomen, the artificial organs, the weave of my skin and synthetic fibers of my musculature, the feed into my optic nerve of a litany of aggregated data. There's very little that can do me serious harm out there, and I'm going to see it coming. The old woman is still chuckling, looking through her crinkled eyes, her skin like a walnut. Yeah, afraid. Afraid of what this job makes me. Maybe not this one, but when it's successful, when it will be successful, the jobs that follow. Bigger, more sensitive, higher profile, riskier. Of course they'll pay better. God knows I could use the credit. But when you take a certain kind of work, above a certain profile, well, there are going to be repercussions. I had a sergeant who liked to say there were two types of people, those prepared to do whatever it took to get what they wanted, and everyone else. Of course, he meant that we should be like the first kind, but here's the secret. If everyone's like that, we're all fucked. Well, it's only got room for a certain quotient of sociopaths. It's the big swinging dicks treating geopolitics as a pissing contest that got us where we are today, after all. Still, it's a growth market for acid-resistant umbrellas and smart prosthetics, so I, of all people, should be grateful. When it comes to the job, which has now taken on proper noun significance in my embattled psyche, the people on the other end of the hotel phone are going to be the first kind. Just doing whatever it takes, say, or hiring a washed-up super soldier for the hard parts. If you got it, flaunt it, right? Speculate to accumulate. I'm not supposed to have to weigh shit like this. I miss the days of simple employment, a chain of command, or at least a structure, analysts and shit. People, a framework you could put your trust in, even, God help us, the accountants. Christ knows I shouldn't have to track my own finances. There seems to be a dearth of numerate black market hackers at my disposal. Now you think that would be a growth market. But what's the choice here? A return to state work? Noble duty in the service of HMG and Associates? Like they'd let me in the front door. But there's disavowal and disavowal. I'm no stranger to the tradesman's entrance in any number of the old grand Whitestones. I still know people, or people who know people. Maybe I could drum up some more friends. Get some work on the books that didn't leave me sweating coffee through my neck in barren hotel rooms. But there's the rub, or rather the scratch, or lack thereof. HMG aren't exactly flush, which is how I came to be freelancing in the first place, lest we forget. Doubt they've got much of a grey ops budget, let alone anything darker. And how much faith do I have in their decisions, or those of the city fathers in the special economic zone that pull their strings? Perhaps I could just retire, head into the shires, find a little cottage somewhere, eke out my days doing something with my hands. Carpentry, maybe, assuming I could afford any actual wood, which is doubtful without exactly the kind of work I'd be abandoning. Maybe one of my connections through the Eastports could send me up something synthetic, slap a bit of varnish or lead-thick paint on it. No one round that way will want to look too closely. I could sell it at a market. The shires, that's old wounds. Family, or what's left of it. The rump that toughed it out after division. And fuck knows what I do the first time a finger locks or a knee freezes up. Turns out I'm in need of a support structure of my own, not to mention self-care machine parts and a regular supply of high-grade pharmaceuticals. Which brings us back to the lucrative world of potentially globe destabilizing freelance work. The fucking case is still there, beside me on the bed like a dead lover. Cold, morbid, seen. I don't want the job. I don't want what's in the case. I don't want the call. I'm going to get out of this. Give my apologies. Work it out somehow. When I get back shoreside, I'll dig up some of those contacts. Put some old names in the less renowned agencies. People know me. People owe me. If I call in every favour, I should be able to grind out one paying gig at least, even if it's not market rates. I could ring. Silence. Time to go to work.
That was incredibly real feeling. That was...
I fucking loved that.
Yeah, it was good. It was good.
Your agent's dick. They're wrong. I hope you're listening, agent. You're wrong.
So yeah, that is a bit of a stream of consciousness of a character that I created back in 2018 who is implied as a washed up super soldier built by the British government and then kind of abandoned after a budgeting snafu, who was then forced to go off and do work that paid the bills, kept her moving.
Yeah,
but,
potentially globally stabilizing freelance work. I
Yeah.
wrote that one down. Thought that was great. The very grimy cyberpunk feels of the lexicon was evident from earlier in the story than the specific references to his augments and to the world, which I really enjoyed. I felt like that was very much showing, not telling at a very high level.
Should clarify, the character is a woman as well, but
Right.
You wouldn't know that from any of that. And also not from my voice, because I didn't decide to do it like this.
You didn't go full Python. It's always a good idea. Never go full Python.
Terry Jones banging away, yeah.
I really enjoyed the device of being locked into the very organic cycle of drinking this awful coffee and then pissing it out. That was really, really solid. For a while I was doing a job that involved me traveling, and I spent some time in hotel rooms waiting for things to happen and that kind of thing. And I'm sure a lot of people have had that experience, but you really made it feel exactly how that feels, where your head's just buzzing and you're inside this really plain room that's kept plain deliberately because thousands of people sleep there every year.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed it.
The tangent about the whiskey, the bad whiskey in the fridge, just absolutely captured me, I have to say. How quickly it just had that real sense of train of thought, because it just jumped from idea to idea, and sort of spiraled out and exploded. You got that onto the page and then into the ether of recording really well. Just absolute. Like I've written stream of consciousness stuff before, but I think a lot of the time it's really easy to make it a bit more literary to get a story across. But you did a fantastic job of just letting their train of thought carry them to narrative points. It was really elegant, really well done.
Certainly, what I was trying not to do was jump straight to the ultimate conclusion that she reaches, which is that she actually does want to stop doing this. So you need to like meander to where you secretly want to go, but can't just go there. That was the goal. Ideally, that would have been a bit shorter, but
the build to that emotional crescendo of she sort of thought herself into the point where she doesn't want to do it anymore. She's gonna refuse it, and then it ticks. I mean, that felt incredibly relatable to me. When you've got something coming up that you really don't want to do, and you start, getting that Weasley little voice in your head, being like, "Oh, I could get around this. I could do," and it's a really horrible situation to find yourself in, and to be thinking like that because of the pressures of the world around you. So, and you brought that to life beautifully. And I think Nico's point about the way that the inner monologue works, I would add to that by saying that from start to finish, the sort of the veracity of it, like the realness of it, is a bit of a counterpoint to how cyberpunk normally is. Like it's normally like the blades like switch out and they flicker in the cyberpunk blue pink lighting and all that kind of thing, whereas you were quite organic with this inner monologue, even when they were discussing inorganic things. And it lent a great weight to all of the emotional stuff that was coming up very naturally as the inner monologue flowed. But it was really, really solid, and I liked it a lot. I enjoyed the world, I enjoyed the character, and I thought you also performed it very well as well.
Well, thank you. As I put that down to reading to my kids a lot, although I'm not supposed to swear at them quite as much as I do.
Speaking of a bit where you swore, I absolutely loved the line about the world's only got room for a certain quotient of sociopaths. About how like not everyone can be a bloodthirsty go-getter.
Yep,
it's absolutely right.
I mean, one of the nice things about this character is I can literally just say what I think.
Yeah, it really resonated with me, and I'm sure it would have resonated with everyone listening. This idea of this future that this is set in being very dark, like not being able to get hold of wood, for example, because geopolitics was treated as a pissing contest, as you put it, in that growth market for acid-resistant brollies. that was a great line.
When I was kicking this around in 2018, I referred to it as near future dystopia, and now I just call it near future.
Near future, yeah.
Oh, I'll also say I love the phrase "far past late, not yet early."
Yeah, I don't know where I got that from. To go back through. I mean, even like the term "the bitching hour," I was so pleased with that. So clearly, I must have nicked it from somewhere.
I was racking my brain whilst you were performing, just sort of thinking, have I heard this bitching hour before? I don't think I have.
I think I must have got it from somewhere. I don't have original thoughts. So...
I refuse to accept that.
I'm mostly a low power AI. I just sort of collaging stuff I've got from elsewhere into a little pattern that tickles my what's names.
You're the beta version of ChatGPT.
Yeah, basically. GPT -4.
Yeah.
I think you may have stumbled upon your own way, although there is a podcast called The Bitching Hour.
Well, there you go.
A weekly dose of witchy commentary on the good, the bad, and the gay, mostly the gay. So you guys listening are podcast fans, feel free to check that one out.
Yeah, sounds engaging.
You're welcome, Bitching Hour.
Right, well, I suspect I should close us out here.
Yeah, rack yourself up, boy.
Definitely. All right, here we go. Bitching. Yeah, did you see that? The muscles around Strax's massive jaw strained as he tried to purse his lips disapprovingly before continuing. The slop gobbo gave Grixis his grog and slop first. I've a mind to complain to the whipmaster. But he's got no honour. Did you hear he beat Primus Ulcus in the street after his victory in the arena, just so he could steal his mouth slave? Speaking of cocksuckers, what about that female you tried to buy on a forum for a ridiculous sum? It's clear you can't learn to have an eye for value, as yours pop out of your skull whenever you see a pair of dark green tits. You do know they paint their bodies like that to make them look healthier than they are. Same as horses. And you, my friend, would have been robbed if it weren't for me. Strax, what the fuck are you talking like that for? Like what? All critical and judgmental. That's not how a mighty orc speaks. We've only one more fight before we can live properly in a city. And you're talking like this. I'm taking you to the Medicus. The ludus they had grown up in lay in the shadow of the Emperor's arena, every brick of which was mortared with the blood of the orcs and gobos that the mighty warrior emperor had forced to build it. It was on the sand of that arena that young orcs proved their worth to society before joining it. Some chose to remain as gladiators afterwards to make their living in the world. Many left to pursue trades or join the war parties that expanded the empire in an eternal conquest. Others fought their way to political office to exert their will on orc society by force of arms. Philictus and Strax snuck out into the city, leaving the ludus and the arena behind, and their route to the Medicus took them through the blood-stained forum, a place where anything from the empire could be bought, with bartering often giving way to battering. They passed a brutal haggle over a cart loaded with amphorae, in which the vendor was smashing his customer's head into the broad flagstones of the marketplace whilst repeating the price. As Philictus watched, the two came to an understanding when the customer finally capitulated, agreeing to the merchant's valuation. He grinned and dragged Strax onwards. Philictus paid at the door of the Medicus with a quick headbutt to the administrator Gobbo, knocking him off his stool, only for the little thing to tell him that actual coin would be required if he wanted his friend to see the Medicus. Philictus dragged the gobbo up by his throat and fed him 3 hack steel coins. "Keep the change!" The receptionist began retching to retrieve the coins and sobbed loudly when only 2 came back up. The last one would likely require a sieve and a soothing salve for the gobbo's ringpiece. The 2 gladiators swaggered into the Medicus ward, with Philictus now pointedly ignoring the constant monologue of complaints from Strax. Within the hour, he found himself picking his nose whilst waiting for the Medicus gobbo to finish examining Strax in a private chamber. From where he stood, leaning against the rough stone wall of the infirmary, he could see all those gladiators who were recovering rapidly from the wounds they had sustained in the arena, and also one that had been dealt beyond that sacred ground. Steel chains restrained the bulky shape of Aulcus in the closest bay, binding him at his ankles and his throat. Philictus quickly saw the reason why his arms had not also been secured. The whipmaster had maimed him, taking off both his hands at the middle of his forearm. Pallid appendages made of newly grown flesh had sprouted from those wounds. Philictus watched the tiny hands wiggling from the stumps of his arms, the pale fingers repeatedly unfurling and then closing, as Aulcus strained to make fists once more. Philictus felt a surge of excited anticipation at the thought of watching Aulcus's retribution on the whipmaster when his hands were finally recovered. "Philictus!" The little Medicus gobbo called him over. The tiny creature wore a white robe that was stained with old emerald blood and stood just outside the examination chamber whilst rolling a smoke. Philictus could hear that Strax was still babbling away indignantly to himself within. "Simply put, your friend's come down with a nasty case of being a bitch." "Is it fatal?" "In most cases, I'm afraid so. His mind has turned from the proper way of resolving disputes and will never recover simplicity again." What?" Many of the gobbo's words used too many letters for the limited mind of Philictus to comprehend. The mini Medicus finished rolling his smoke and lit it with a match struck on the wall before clarifying. "He's fucked. We'll have to put him down. You didn't engage in any of that with him, did you? Last thing we need around here is a bitching outbreak." Philictus shook his head. "Good. Well, return to the arena and take comfort in knowing that your friend's bones will be given to the foundries. Come back and see me if you notice any sign of the disease in yourself." Philictus paused for a moment by the door and listened to Strax, muttering to himself. I don't know why I need to be restrained. Not like I'm some nut job like Alcus, is it? Why don't this gown got a back to it? I know them gobbos wanted easier access, always poking those knobbly fingers where they're not wanted. Should know their place. Philoctus closed his eyes and gave the sign of a fallen brother, 2 fingers pressed to his forehead, before leaving to trudge dejectedly back home to the Ludus. You missed it! Grixis greeted him warmly when he returned. He was surrounded by some of the other adolescents of the Ludus, who were beaming exuberantly. Missed what? The bloody fuck Emperor Solanus was here, inspecting the Ludus! I got him to sign my face! Grixis grinned and turned his big head to show the bloody scrawl that was already beginning to heal on his cheek. And me missed it, said Philoctus, bitterly raising his hands in a gesture of frustration. Why is it I always missed the good stuff? Why did nobody tell me he was coming? He noticed then that Grixis and the others were looking at him strangely, and it was too late to stop talking. Oh, bugger, whispered Philoctus as they surrounded him, wondering who, if anyone, he could blame this misfortune on.
My favourite thing you've ever written.
I laughed so many times in that. That was absolutely fantastic.
Oh, good.
I'm going to read you my first note verbatim.
Mm-hmm.
Roman orcs, I'm fucking in. That's the first thing I wrote down, and it was only a few lines in, but I was like, I'm gonna have a really good time with this, and it fucking delivered, man.
I think that this is the first orc and gobbo fiction that I have encountered since I was a small man, and you have reminded me how much I loved it. I used to have a White Dwarf subscription when I was in Small Things, and I'd forgotten like how the orcs and the orc and goblin short stories and all the stuff about squigs and everything. Just it's life affirming, the glorious stupidity of it all.
I mean, there's some great moments in that when he was shoving the 3 coins in the goblin's mouth and shouting, "Keep the chain!"
Yes. Well, that and following it up with, I think, the first use of the word ring piece that I've come across since the late 90s, which was again a masterful blast from the past, if you're allowed to say that.
Yeah, use a sieve.
Yes. From bartering to battering, magnificent.
So the doctor just rolling and lighting a cigarette in the waiting room is just a wonderful image, I have to say.
Yeah. And finally, he's got a nasty case of being a bitch. I didn't know you could do that. I've got to say, like you've transcended the medium.
I did. It was really close to the end, but I did write down. I got him to sign my face. It was your delivery on all of it as well, man. Like everything was so heartfelt. It was fantastic.
They're very
orcs. The best orcs are the most earnest. The most sort of earnest. Yes, that's the word, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh. Yes, it was. That was a lot of fun writing that. I know. Nico has a real soft spot for like goblins and orcs and stuff. So I took careful aim with this one before swinging. And I don't often write comedy pieces, but I thoroughly enjoyed this one.
I think that's the closest on the podcast we've come to one of us writing a story that sounds like it would be the product of us writing together.
Yeah,
because it had all of those nice, like, accurate bits of Roman history in there that I would expect from you, and then just dumb as fuck orcs dumped it. It's like someone. It was like my Make a Wish Foundation moment. That's what that was.
Oh yes, I actually found that I was sort of struggling to define what being a bitch is.
I mean that's more of an open-minded challenge, I think.
Yeah, and it's so the reason that this sort of initially took form for me was that it's far clearer in Orc society because it's any kind of complaining or moaning or anything critical because they just don't live like that. And I really I seized on this idea that they can recover from any injury, but any kind of like mental tweaks or illnesses or whatever are just fatal. They're just that orc's gone.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Oh yeah, the sign of the fallen brother. Absolutely heartrending.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there is something very simple about the like brotherly love in these kind of gladiatorial stories, isn't it? Because they live such brutal and very simple lives. So there is the sacred ground stuff and the signals for the fallen.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, I only really put that kind of stuff in order to make it feel more whole. Because at one point in the drafting process, it was just jokes strung together.
I'd have been fine with that, but you're right. Just chucking in a little bit of that color, and like you say, because it's familiar, you can be evocative with very small references here and there.
Definitely.
Bit of that color, and that color is green.
Yeah,
color is green.
They paint them,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you both found it funny. That was my goal. So
yeah, it's a good thing. Good thing you intended it to be funny, because otherwise I'd have felt really bad at laughing the whole way through.
If you've got to the end and been like, so yeah, that really helped me get through some tough stuff I've been dealing with recently.
Thank you for listening to my heartfelt confessional. Of the time I was a bitching hawk.
My cousin Gorgug, he's become a real bitch, and I just, I needed to get it on paper.
We had to have him put down.
When you're because Nico writes comedy more often than I do.
Yeah.
When you're constructing a comedy story, do you still have that bit of the process where you do put something of yourself in the story, or do you try and keep it arm's length from you so that you can poke fun at anything that's in the story?
I think you have to, because it's your sense of humor that you're putting in. Like, I think it would. I think I could probably write jokes that I thought weren't funny for a certain crowd, but you wouldn't enjoy writing it, would you? If you were like, "Oh, I'm gonna aim this at 5-year-olds." Like, maybe some people do love doing that, but fall down, bum go fart. Not really. I mean,
I'm already laughing. Yeah,
my point. Completely undoing my point.
Love it. Love that bungo. Yeah, guy's a rascal.
I am undone.
That got me as well. Well, I think those are the stories. So, should we tell people where they can follow you online and where they can buy your books, importantly, as well, before we
Absolutely. Yes. Hello, podcasts. Please buy my books. I can be found online at davewragg.com. That is with a silent W, just to make everyone's life difficult. I assume that my name will feature somewhere in the show notes, so with any luck, it won't surprise anyone. So that's davewragg.com. And I'm on Twitter at It's Dave Wragg, although Twitter is a kind of vile and unpleasant place, but I do have to go on there to flog books, so you may catch me there eventually. I have a bio link, so if anyone knows what a bio link is, bio.link/Dave Wragg. That has links to all of my socials, including Mastodon, as I'm the only person there. Please come and join me. It's so lonely. Everything else on my website. You can get the books from pretty much every online store and even occasional physical stores. I can recommend a bookshop in Letchworth called David's Books. Very good place to go, and they stock my stuff.
Fantastic. And the first Tales of the Plains book is coming out in July this year.
Yes, 20th of July for the Hunters in hardback and ebook, and with any luck, audiobook. Which I think has now been recorded and is in production right now. So I'm quite excited by that.
It's incredibly exciting.
Yeah.
Well, join us on the next episode where we'll be digging in with some interview questions. And I'm not entirely sure what we're going to find. I'm looking forward to it.
It's going to be filth.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The tiny bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For magnificent beardery, let's cast the Chinicus folliculale spell on Gary Laird. For rich ginger tones on the scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?